Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. I have a discussion for you today. I want to talk about romance. You may or may not know that in September there's an event going on called Unhoneymooners, and it is celebrating the wonderful genre of romance. It is organized by the Bookish Brides, and there is a slew of co-hosts, among them Steve Donahue and Sarah from the Bookish Knitter. And a few days ago, Steve and Sarah had a wonderful conversation on romance. I will leave a link to it in the description box below. If you have not seen it, go watch it. It's super interesting, even if you're not particularly interested in romance. They talk about why is the genre looked down on, what makes a book a romance, why are they so fun to read, things like that. It's just a conversation between two friends who love the genre of romance. And among the many interesting things that they said, there was something that rang particularly true with me. It was the fact that, I keep saying they said because I don't know exactly which one of them said that, and I think they both agreed, so I'm going to stick with they said. They said that romance, even though it's considered to be an easy genre, that a lot of people think that if you've read one, you've read them all, that it's not true, that you will probably need to read more than one to really get to know the genre, to really fall in love with the genre. And I thought that was very important because this is exactly what happened to me. So I wanted to share a little bit what my journey with romance was. I thought it would be interesting. So my journey with romance. Once upon a time, when I was a little girl, I went to school. I had a friend. That friend had sisters, much older sisters. They were 10 years older than her. And I suppose these sisters introduced her, my friend, to a collection of teen romances. And that friend introduced me to that collection. They were in French because at the time I did not speak any English. The name of the collection was Cœur à Cœur, so basically translated in English, heart to heart. And they were about teenage girls. So the format of the romance was that the girl is 16, she's going to school, she's not the most popular girl in school, but she's not the least popular girl either. She's like middle of the pack kind of girl, and she falls in love for the first time, and at the end there's a kiss, and that was that. So there was nothing bad going on in these books. It was very wholesome. So there were no drugs, no sex. The sex didn't exist. No violence of any sort. The worst thing that could happen was perhaps that a grandparent would die peacefully in their sleep, something like that. So it was a very wholesome kind of read. I tried to find some pictures of the books online just to show them to you, but I couldn't find any. And all of these books were translated from English. I know that because first things first, the girls had names that don't exist in French, like Allison, Ashley, Connie. So obviously these books were written in English. So most of them were set in the United States, like in Florida and Maine and things like that. So I know they were translated from English, and I tried to find out what that collection was in English, and I couldn't find anything. I think what happened was that this translated collection actually translated from many different teen romance collections in English. So I think they grabbed everything that they could and translated in French, and it was just packaged in as one collection in French. So I tried to find some equivalents in English, but I don't recognize the covers. So I have nothing to show you except to say that I read a lot of these teen romances when I was 12 years old. And what I loved about them was, well, in my mind, they were grown-up books because I was reading that at 11 or 12 years old. And at 12 years old, a 16-year-old is an adult. And for me, they were grown-up books. And I read those with a sense of, like I was reading about my friends. I wanted the girl to get the boyfriend because as much as I would have wanted my friend to get the boy that she liked, I was reading those as though it was the most important thing in the world. These books were real life to me. They were amazing, and I just loved them. And I read them with, whenever I was reading one, I was completely immersed in the world and the rest didn't exist. And it was a wonderful feeling because there's always a happy end at the end, and I know that there's nothing bad would happen, and it was just, I really liked them. After a little while, I stopped reading them. I don't know exactly why. I don't think there is a precise reason why I stopped reading these books. I think it's simply that I outgrew them. I started reading other kinds of books, other genres. I started reading mysteries like Agatha Christie and Arsène Lupin and things like that. And then I started reading grown-up books. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking that these books, because I read them when I was 11 and 12, they were kids' books. When I read them at 11 and 12, I thought they were grown-up books. But now that I was really, truly a grown-up at 15, I knew that these were kids' books. And I was not reading them anymore. I think somewhere in the back of my mind it was there. And then a few years went by and I had not read romance in a little while. And however, what I had started reading was royal gossip, because in the 1990s there was a lot of gossip going on with the British royal family. And if you've read any book about Lady Diana, you will have noticed that when she was a teenager before marrying Prince Charles, basically the only thing that she read were books by Barbara Cartland. So that was the first time that I was hearing that name, and it sort of rang some sort of nostalgic bell for me, because I was thinking, oh, romance books, oh yeah, they were fun. And I started to read some Barbara Cartland. I have to admit that the first time that I read a Barbara Cartland, I laughed. I thought it was ridiculous. I thought it was so silly, because by then I was so much older. I'm going to say that I was 18, maybe I was 17. I was a much older teenager. I was not 12 anymore. So reading about these girls looking for a duke, for a prince or whatever, it was just plain ridiculous. I could see that the book was not necessarily well made, that the characters didn't have a lot of depth, that each book was very predictable. And yet I kept reading them because I enjoyed them. So I had a neighbor at university in the dorms. She had a drawer full of them and she invited me to borrow them as much as I wanted. She was really nice. And I read quite a few of these, of her books, so of Barbara Cartland's. However, to this day, I cannot say which ones I read and which one I didn't, because in my mind, they're all the same thing. So I read a few of those. And then when I left university, I guess I lost my access to Barbara Cartland. I guess I could have borrowed books at the library or something, but I didn't. And I stopped reading romance altogether. I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking that romance is not serious, and I'm a serious person. I pride myself in my intelligence. I am an intelligent woman, hence I do not read romance. I think in my mind somewhere there was this very clear difference. But it could also be that I was just not interested. I was living my adult life. I didn't need this fantasy world of romance, and I'm not a reader of fantasy like with sorcerers and trolls or things like that. So I guess in a way, I wanted to read about realistic books. So for many, many years, I did not read any. So what changed? Well, 2020 happened, and the epidemic of COVID-19 that sent everybody home for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I started to watch a lot of BookTube. And I started to watch what we call our little corner of BookTube, where we are free to read what we want, where we are not judged for what we read. We are allowed to read whatever we want. And I was watching all of these booktubers reading romance books and just really enjoying them. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking, it's true that I really enjoyed them. I was thinking back of that collection I read when I was 12 years old. And I was thinking, I really did enjoy these books. And I was trying to remember when was the last time I read a book feeling that involved. And I couldn't really remember. So there was a feeling there that I wanted to have again. And in the summer of 2020, Sarah from The Bookish Knitter, her channel had a different name then, but she held a booktube event called The Summer Fling, and inviting us to read romance novels during the summer. And I wanted to participate. I thought, yay, I want to read a romance. I want to have that feeling that I had when I was 12 years old. So I went to the bookstore, Chapters, the big box bookstore that we have in Canada, because it's basically the only bookstore that has a romance section. And I started to pick up books from the shelves and reading the blurb on the back. And I cringed. I read these blurbs on the back and I just couldn't. It sounded so cheesy and so terrible. So, no, I'm not going to read that. That's not going to be enjoyable. So I just put the books back on the shelf and I came back home. And I was disappointed, I guess, because I really wanted to read a romance. But somehow I guess I was not ready to pay for it. So, I'm going to go to the library. So I went to the library. In the Ottawa Central Main Branch, there is a wall of romance. So I went to the wall of romance and just figured I'm going to grab a few at random and judge them just by the cover. I'm not going to read the blurbs because apparently that's not, they are not attracting me, they are repelling me. So I'm just going to look at the covers, and I just want a cover where both people are clothed on the cover and no Amish. These were my two criteria. So I grabbed a couple of books. There was one contemporary and one historical romance. So I figured, okay, I'm going to read that. So I came home and I read the contemporary novel, which was The Ones Who Survived. I'm going to check. The Ones Who Got Away by Loren. So I read that book, which is a contemporary romance. It is about a woman and a group of friends. They survived a high school shooting during the prom, and they are the ones who got away. And there is some sort of a second chance relationship between her and the boy who she was supposed to go to the prom with, or something like that. I already don't remember. And I read that, and the main feeling I had was shock. Because even though I had heard on BookTube that romances were sexy or spicy, or there was a bit of smut in it, it was not what I was expecting. Because in that book, it was very, very explicit. It was like an instruction sheet. Like, you take this piece and you insert it there, and then you do this, and then you do that. And it's just, everything was very, very explicit. And I was shocked. So basically, the sex scene got very much in the way of the love story, in my opinion, for me, because it was the first time I was reading it. So I did not get that feeling that I wanted when I was a kid, that feeling I had when I was 12 years old and reading these teen romances where the relationship and the love story was just the most important thing, and that the main character was my best friend and I wanted her to get the boy. I did not get that, so I figured, oh well, too bad. I'm going to try the other one. So I tried the other one. I've already forgotten the title because I did not go farther than page 4. There were like 3 or 4 swear words in as many pages, and I thought, no, I'm not going to go through 400 pages of that. It's a historical romance. Somewhere I guess I wanted something like Jane Austen, something very proper, something very, perhaps a bit cleaner, I guess, but something, yeah, something subtle. And swear words, it's not subtle and it's not good writing. So I'm just brought the book back to the library, and that was that. So I was a bit disappointed. So in a way, I guess I thought, okay, well, romance maybe is not for me. So a few weeks went by, and now it was close to Christmas, and I found myself in a large surface store. And of course, my favorite section of the large surface is the book section. So I went to the book section, and they had a special at 2 for $15. And by then I had sort of taken notice of a few names, because I figured, okay, if the 2 that I took at random did not do the job, perhaps I should aim for the ones, the authors that are better known. So 2 names I had heard were Nora Roberts and Debbie Macomber. I bought these 2 books. They were 2 for $15, and they were double headers. So for each book, I had 2 books. It was basically 4 for $15. And I figured, okay, that's to get into romance. I guess that's where I should start, with the most famous writers. So I started with the Debbie Macomber, and the first one that I read was Christmas Letters. It was okay. I cannot say that I really liked it. It was barely interesting. I was kind of disappointed by the book. So I put it down, and instead of reading the second by the same author, I decided to read the Nora Roberts. This one was set in the Highlands. The title is Rebellion. So this one is a historical. It is set in the 18th century during the time of the Jacobite rebellions in Scotland. And I liked it a bit more. But once again, I did not get the feeling that the main character was my best friend. I was just rooting for her and for the boyfriend. I did not get that feeling. So I was a bit disappointed. And given that these 2 authors are some of the best known in the field, I thought, well, that probably means that romance is not for me. And I was more or less reconciled with the idea that romance was not for me anymore, because maybe I outgrew it. Perhaps I've read too many other kinds of books and I cannot really enjoy romance anymore. So that was basically that. However, during Christmas time of 2020, there was a lot of talk about that new Netflix series called Bridgertons. And I saw a booktuber who does not necessarily read romance. Not who doesn't read romance, but whose channel we do not associate necessarily with romance, and that is Heidi from my reading life. She reads nonfiction. She is the host of the Springathon, where we read nonfiction about nature. She reads serious books, serious literature, and she was rereading the Bridgertons. She had already read it, and she was rereading the entire series in anticipation of the Netflix series. So I thought, okay, if Heidi thinks that these books are good, I guess there must be something to them. So I decided to try the first of the series, which is The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. So I decided to read that. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, if this doesn't work, well, then that's it. That really means that I'm not a romance reader. So I started to read this, and it worked. I giggled from the first page to the last page. I was rooting for Daphne. I was rooting for the Duke of Hastings. I wanted them to find happiness, and I was completely immersed in their world, and I just absolutely adored the book. And I finally had these feelings that I was looking for, the same type of marveling in front of the love story that I had when I was 12 years old. And I was really, really happy that I found something like that. So that meant that I could find some romance books that suited me. So since then, I have read, well, not since then, since the summer fling of 2020, I have read 28 romance books. So that means about one a month. In fact, it's a bit more than that, I guess, because I tend to read like 3 or 4 in a small cluster, and then I don't read any for many weeks. And I have read about 75% historical romance and 8% and 25% contemporary romance. So, and I was wondering, while preparing, I guess, this video, because I did not prepare a lot, I was wondering, okay, what does it tell about me as a romance reader that I prefer the historical romance rather than the modern day romance? And I thought about it a bit, and I think the reason is that I accept that romance is in a large part a fantasy genre. It's not real life. And it's easier for me to accept a fantasy version of Regency of the 18th century, of any other time period, than it is to accept a fantasy version of today. So I think that's the main reason why I prefer historical romances to modern day romances. And also, I think it's easier to accept in the historical setting that the only path to happiness for a woman is to find a man. In modern times, I think it's more difficult to accept. But in a historical romance, I can live with that easily, because that is true. The only path through life for women was basically finding a husband. So I think that's one of the reasons why I prefer historical romances. And also, I was wondering, are there things that I'm struggling with as a romance reader? So after having read like 1 romance a month for the past 2 years, are there things that I am still struggling with? And the answer is yes. One thing that I'm still struggling with is the blurbs. I still find them completely cringy. The summaries of the books at the back, it's terrible. They sound awful. So whenever I hear Sarah, Steve, or whoever just received a new romance book and reads the summary at the back and just says, oh, doesn't that sound wonderful? And I'm thinking, no, that sounds awful. That sounds so cringy. And yeah, I'm still not reconciled with the blurbs at the back of the book. They still sound terrible to me. But I know, in a way, how to interpret them, I guess. I know how to grab the information that I need. So I need to know whether it's set in modern days or Regency or historical romance. I would like to know whether it's enemies to lovers or friends first or the fake boyfriend or whatever. Whatever is the basic storyline. And that's pretty much it. I don't really want to know anything else about it. Well, the tone, I guess. I want to know if it's a comedy or a serious book. But besides that, I don't want to know anything, so I'm not really reading the blurb at the back. So I still need to work on that. Something else that I need to work on. I don't know if I need to work on this really. It's I haven't explored a lot of the subgenres of romance. So historical romance, I read quite a few, but beyond that, I have read almost nothing. I've read what I would call general romance, modern times, serious, and I've read rom-coms, and that's it. I haven't read a cowboy romance. I haven't read a hospital romance. I haven't read any paranormal romances. I haven't read Amish romances, and I have to say that Amish, I don't think it's going to happen. No. For the reasons that I said, I have difficulty accepting a fantasy version of now, and I think the Amish romance is a completely fantasized version of the Amish. And even the cowboy romance, I'm pretty sure it's a completely fantasized version of the cowboy. So yeah, I'm not necessarily attracted to those. So I don't know if as a reader, I really should push myself to read other genres, subgenres of romance. But I don't think that I should, because romance is meant to be just purely enjoyed. And if I find plenty enough of books to be enjoyed in historical romance and in rom-coms, then I don't see why I should sort of push myself to explore other genres. Something else that I have difficulty with, that I'm still questioning myself, is how much logic, how much realism to expect from romances. Of course, as I said, I think romance is in large part a fantasy genre. I don't think that people in real life fall in love the same way that they fall in love in romance books. It's a basic reality of romance. I have to deal with it. However, very often I find that the authors use bad communications between the two main characters, the two lovers, to sort of create difficulties and add length to the novel. Because I guess if everything is too easy, then the novel would be over in like 10 pages. They meet, they fall in love, and that's that. Of course, there need to be obstacles, but sometimes they are a bit ridiculous. So you have characters jumping to conclusions. So in one of the books that I read, rom-coms, it was The Unhoneymooners by Loren, I think. And the basic premise is that this girl does not like the other guy. So it's basically an enemies to lovers. And the reason the girl hates the guy is that the first time that they met, she was eating junk food. And that girl is a bit overweight. She's round. And the guy was looking at her a bit weirdly. And she thought, well, he's judging me because I'm round and eating junk food. And that was the reason for the enmity between both, which is obviously ridiculous. She just jumped to conclusion and held on to that for like 2 years. Utterly ridiculous. And then one that I read more recently, it is Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. One of the guys cancels a date with the other and does not explain, just says, I can't make it, sorry. And I don't think he gives any other explanation. And the other guy just presumes, okay, well, he's dumping me because he just doesn't want to be with me. He's just setting me up like 5 minutes before the date is supposed to happen. So this is just ridiculous. But the reason that the first guy did not give any explanation, it was that he didn't want to look like a mama's boy, because the reason he was canceling the date was that his mother had called him in a panic. There's an emergency, come quickly, I need you, something like that. And he didn't want to sound like a mama's boy and say, sorry, I have to cancel our date, my mother needs me. Which is utterly ridiculous, because helping your mother is always a good reason. Being caring about your mother always makes you look good. So it was utterly ridiculous that the text message sent was that, the dry text message without any explanation. And the reason for the absence of explanation is also completely ridiculous. So I'm still struggling a little bit with that. How much logic to expect, how much common sense to expect from the characters. But at the same time, if every character was behaving strictly according to common sense, I guess we wouldn't have a lot of romance novels, because not a lot of them make sense. So there's that. And the last thing that I'm still struggling with, it's with older romances. For example, an author that I've discovered this year is Georgette. I absolutely adore her books. I've read the first one in February or March, the first one that I read by her, so it's not her first, but it was my first. And since then, I have read seven, and this is the 7th that I read. And these were written in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and some of them don't age well. So in this one, there's a scene in particular where, so the story is that our heroine follows the hero, who is a rake, a bad character. She follows him willingly for a while, and at some point, she wants to go back home. She basically tells him, okay, that's it, I'm leaving. And the guy is completely enraged by that. because he's being played with and he doesn't like that. So he grabs the girl by the throat and threatens to strangle her if she tries to make a scene. And just wants to make sure that she understands that she is completely at his mercy, that nobody will come to help her. And I thought that was utterly disgusting, because even in 1932, because this was published in 1932, I'm pretty sure this was not a romantic scene. And nowadays it's just awful. And this put me completely off. Like, it took me completely out of this beautiful, this one is 18th century, so it's not the Regency, but it completely took me out of this fantasy world, I guess, and put me in a very, very ugly place. And I was wondering, okay, do I keep reading or not? And I'm trying very hard not to judge a book of 1932 by the standards of 2022, but still, it's very hard to keep to ignore that. So I decided to ignore it, to pretend it did not happen, and I kept reading, and the rest was good. So the rest wasn't bad, but it's still, that scene remains that is very, very ugly. So I'm still struggling on how to judge older books, older romances, trying not to let the standards of the time interfere with my enjoyment, but it's difficult. So I'm still trying to deal with that, trying to figure out a way to deal with that. And I think that's what I wanted to say. I think that gives you a pretty good idea of who I am as a romance reader and how I got to where I am. I still have a lot to discover in romance. I don't think I will become an exclusively romance reader. That I like to read too many things, and in a way, I don't think they are that satisfying. It's fluff. To me, it's very much of an easy read if we compare to historical research and nonfiction. It's a bit like food that does not sustain you for a very long time. It's good while you eat it, but you're still hungry like an hour later. So it's a bit like that. So I don't think I will become an exclusively a romance reader. And the other thing that I don't know if I will stick with it. I love reading them. I enjoy them very much. As I said, I read like on average one a month. But I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if in 5 years from now I'm not reading them anymore because I have moved on to something else. I wouldn't be surprised. So I don't know yet if it's something that will stay with me for a long time or not. So I don't know. You don't know either. Anyway, if you've made it all the way to this point in this video, thank you very much for listening. And let me know in the comments, are you a romance reader? What sort of journey did you have? Did you fall in love with the first book that you read and stuck with the genre for years and years and years? Or did you read one and thought it was stupid and never tried a second one? Or whatever. Let me know what your journey was. And I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!